So my current prediction is 12 to 15 years from now, that I think we have a 50-50 chance by the end of the 2030s of getting to longevity escape velocity, getting those first 20 years I just spoke about. Get yourselves together, boys and girls. Actually, work out what your portfolio of products is going to need to be when this change happens, because the change is going to be so abrupt that you will not be able to react quickly enough. The companies that actually do anticipate the anticipation and figure out what to do to roll out when this happens, when this massively abrupt thing happens, those are the companies that are going to thrive, and the companies that have not done that are going to go down.
Aubrey, good morning. Great to see you recently at the Biomarkers of Aging conference at Harvard in Boston, along with people like Vadim Gladyshev and Steve Horvath and David Sinclair and other prominent leaders in the field of longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, and thank you for having me back on the show.
Delighted to have you. Nice of you to join us today to talk about what's going on at the LEV Foundation and share your views on recent progress in the field of longevity.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Great. So just to start us off, can you please reintroduce the LEV Foundation and what it's about?
Sure. So LEV Foundation is my latest entity, the third nonprofit that I have led over the past 20 years. And we have a somewhat different focus than my previous two organizations. Everything that I do and have done for the past quarter century has been revolving around the concept of rejuvenation by damage repair. And this is inherently a divide and conquer approach to bringing aging under medical control, where we develop a whole bunch of different treatments and apply them to the same individual at the same time. So, of course, like any divide and conquer approach in any field, this is a two-phase thing. First of all, you develop the components and then you put them together. Mm-hmm. And in most engineering, putting them together is the easy part. But in medicine, it's not, because we have such a poor understanding of how the body works. And therefore, you can get surprises at that point. So for that reason, I've been desperate to get to the point of being able to put things together. And finally, over the past few years, it's become something that we can do. Some of the components are not yet ready, but a lot of them are ready, not just because of my own work and my team's, but also because of work that's gone on elsewhere in the community. So LEV Foundation is focused on phase 2. We do very large experiments involving thousands of mice that are given a bunch of different treatments all at the same time. The reason why these experiments have to be so large is because we also have to kind of do subsets of the treatments that we're interested in, like have treatment groups that are only getting one of the treatments just to make sure that we're doing it right, things like that. Mm-hmm. When I started LEV Foundation 3 years ago or so, we started out by devising and conducting our first experiment of this nature, which was 1,000 mice, 4 interventions, and that experiment concluded earlier this year. And now we are desperate to get the next one going. The next one's going to be twice as big, 2,000 mice, 8 interventions, and it costs quite a bit of money. So I am desperately trying to raise that money.
Well, good. Well, hopefully we can help you connect with people who can get you that money to continue the important work. Anyone who may not know, what exactly is longevity escape velocity?
Sure. Let me explain what longevity escape velocity is and also what robust mouse rejuvenation is, because they are related but different. Okay. So longevity escape velocity is a concept that I put forward more than 20 years ago. That's all about the fact that when we rejuvenate somebody, or indeed a mouse, in other words, when we repair some of the damage, the self-inflicted damage of aging that the body is doing to itself throughout life, then we are buying time. If we take, let's say, someone who's 60 years old, and we develop a panel of interventions that are fairly good but not perfect at repairing the damage that they have accumulated, then we may take them back to, let's say, biologically 40. And that means that it won't be until they're 80 before they get back to being biologically 60 again, or thereabouts, right? Whether accumulating that amount of damage. And during that time, we will have improved the treatments. We would have made them more comprehensive. Now, that's important, because if we had not made them more comprehensive, then the person comes back when they're biologically 60 for the second time, and our treatments aren't going to work because the treatments only fix, let's call it the easy damage, right?
Yeah.
And the difficult damage, it just doesn't work. So that's not going to be very satisfactory, but since we've had those 20 years to improve the treatments, we will be able to rejuvenate the same people who are 80 now, so that they won't be biologically 60 for the third time until they're, let's say, 110 or whatever. So yes, so the formal definition of longevity escape velocity is that it is the minimum rate at which scientists are going to need to push these treatments forward to improve the quality and comprehensiveness of these treatments in order to stay one step ahead of the problem, such that people who are at any point receiving state-of-the-art treatments will never be getting biologically older, even though they are getting chronologically older, and therefore will never get sick as a result of having a lot of damage in their body. So that's what longevity escape velocity is.
Okay, so basically... go ahead, please.
And it only kicks in once we get the first 20 years. If we develop really, very incomplete rejuvenation treatments that give people like 2 years, that's not good enough. That's not long enough to give us time to get the next 2 years. So you have to get up to a certain threshold before it kicks in. So then robust mouse rejuvenation. Well, the thing about mice is, of course, they already live only 2.5 years, right? So even if we get really good rejuvenation treatments that double that still only gives us a couple of years to do better. So I personally am pretty sure that we will never achieve longevity escape velocity in mice. Touch and go whether we'll ever do it for like cats and dogs. Much harder than it is for humans, which is not the normal situation, of course. So what are we trying to achieve in mice? Well, we're really trying to achieve enough to show that longevity escape velocity in humans is plausible. And so I've defined this kind of arbitrary threshold that says we take mice that are in middle age, so the equivalent of 60-year-old humans, maybe, and we do a lot of things to them, and we're not trying to make them live forever, we're just trying to make them live an extra year. Now, what that means in scientific terms, in terms of, let's say the history of the field, is we would be trebling what we can currently do. At the moment, if you take mice that are, let's say, 1.5 years old, and they would normally live to 2.5, then the best we can do is to give them 4 additional months of healthy life and total life. And that's good, but it's, first of all, not good enough because we'd like to give them more. And secondly, we've been able to do 4 months for half a century. You can do it with calorie restriction, and people have known that for 50 years. So there's been no progress at all. That's really pretty terrifying. Furthermore, we know that calorie restriction, and indeed drugs like rapamycin that are called calorie restriction mimetics, so they trick the body into thinking it's on calorie restriction when it isn't. These things don't work nearly so well in long-lived species like humans as what they do in mice. So this is not the holy grail. So we need to do better. And I believe that this divide and conquer approach, throwing a lot of things at the same mice at the same time, is the way that we're going to do it.
Thank you very much. And if I understand correctly, that's what RMR1 is all about.
That's what the entire RMR research program is all about. So RMR1 was our first attempt, and we want to carry on going until we get those 12 months. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's great. In our last video, and I do want to follow up on that more in just a minute. Before we do, though, in our last video, you had mentioned that there's a 50-50 chance that we might have a meaningful extension of human life expectancy sometime soon. I completely understand that your primary focus is not to predict changes in lifespan and health span, but rather to cause them. Nonetheless, I am interested. Do you have any kind of updated view on how close we might be to that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I do think that making predictions is very important. The fact that most of my colleagues in the biology of aging, most of the subject matter experts, are unwilling to go out and make even probabilistic timeframe predictions for how soon we're going to make this amount of progress I think that holds the field back enormously because it makes people less credible. It makes people think, they're asking for money to do research, but they have no idea whether that research is ever going to benefit humanity. Therefore, we won't give them the money. It holds the thing back. So I am trying to get to a point where my colleagues are willing to give timeframe predictions like I do. I think that dramatic progress in these mouse experiments is going to be enough to give those people, if you like, permission to come out and say, yes, this is how soon we think we can probably get aging under medical control in humans. So my current prediction is 12 to 15 years from now, that I think we have a 50-50 chance by the end of the 2030s of getting to longevity escape velocity, getting those first 20 years I just spoke about.
Fantastic. And for what it's worth, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, as we're able to live longer, we're creating a whole range of what I call wonderful problems, right? Problems of, well, what does that mean for our lives? What does that mean for our businesses? What does that mean for our societies? And I presume you're wholly unapologetic about creating those types of problems.
Those are definitely the kinds of problems I would like to have.
I think we all would. One of those problems that I work with closely, as you probably know, is it makes things a little bit more difficult for insurers, because insurers' business model is all about what mortality will be going forward, and forecasting that mortality is tricky. And so what my team and I do is we look to experts like you around what are the actual revolutions in technology and medicine that could actually bring about incremental and large changes in longevity. When will they happen? How probable are they? And make people aware of them, because our belief, similar to yours, is that many people are preparing for the wrong future, and that we really have a duty to help people predict and prepare for those changes.
And I dearly wish that you and others in your industry had greater influence, to be honest, because the fact is, when I have the good fortune to speak to insurance companies, pension funds, people like that, people whose business is all about, as you say, predicting and modeling how long people are going to live in the future, it's very frustrating. First of all, I say, there's a good chance that this or that thing will happen sometime in the future. And the first thing they'll think is, well, they'll wait and see. They'll deal with that when it happens. Second problem is that these companies have already taken extraordinarily large bets on particular timeframe trajectories of how longevity is going to change. And if they abruptly alter those predictions, then all of the bets that they currently have to be, rethought and, somehow hedged against. It's really hard. And they kind of don't want what I'm saying to be true. So that plays a psychological role that undermines the rationality of policy within these companies. On top of all of that, there's a much more near-term thing that I constantly talk about, which is that the way that these companies actually make their money is from demand from the general public that's based not on how long people are currently living and what mortality rates at this or that chronological age currently are, but rather on how long people expect to live. And what's going to happen? And I think this is going to happen in the next 5 years, because it's going to result from this work in mice that starts getting experts to talk about timeframes. What's going to happen is that people are going to move very, very abruptly from an expectation that they will live only a few years longer than their parents did to an expectation that they will live, essentially indefinitely, even though nobody has done so yet, even though the treatments have only just arrived or they haven't even arrived, they may be still 10 years away. And that expectation is what insurance companies and pension funds and so on need to be anticipating. So I give talks whose title is Anticipate the Anticipation, right? I say, get yourselves together, boys and girls. Actually, work out what your portfolio of products is going to need to be when this change happens, because the change is going to be so abrupt that you will not be able to react quickly enough. The companies that actually do anticipate the anticipation and figure out what to do to roll out when this happens, when this massively abrupt thing happens, those are the companies that are going to thrive, and the companies that have not done that are going to go down. And, nobody really wants to listen. They're terribly courteous and they'll be very attentive, or at least it sounds as though they are. But I have this foreboding that, the following day they wake up and it was all a bad dream and they get on with life as if I didn't exist. It's very disheartening sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, could not agree more with you, and also appreciate your support. We are absolutely fighting that fight, working with companies to anticipate the anticipation, as you describe it. And there are literally trillions of dollars on the line for getting this right, and enormous mistakes being made, candidly, for not doing this. You can imagine in the insurance business, it's very much based on historical data. And it's been very successful looking at historical data in the past. But where that falls critically short is if the future does not look like the past, right? If we have discontinuities, the very likes of which you are in the process of creating.
Yeah, I mean, the trend analysis that insurance companies and so on have tended to rely upon has not been all that successful. There has been a tendency to assume that, life expectancy will rise more slowly than it actually has. But the difference between prediction and reality in the past is a shadow of what the difference between prediction and reality is going to be in the future. So, in essence, you're quite right.
Thank you so much. Well, we agree and appreciate your support on that. But as we both would agree, the best way to predict the future is to actually create the future. And you are in the process of creating that future through RMR. So thank you for going into that other area. But let's now go back into the Robust Mouse Rejuvenation piece. Is it true that the original study, RMR1, is now complete?
Yes, that's true. Well, it's kind of true. It's true in the sense that all the mice are dead. The last mouse died earlier this year.
I'm sorry to hear that, although that was expected.
Indeed. But there's plenty that has not yet been done. First of all, during the study, we made a large variety of measurements of the health of the mice. We looked at how their memory was and how their eyesight and hearing and how they looked. Curvature of the spine is something you can check. And physiological things like, grip strength and endurance and agility. And you can measure things like glucose tolerance and so on. So we did all of this kind of stuff. Of course, a big thing is just body weight. All of these things are done traditionally in mouse lifespan experiments, so we didn't have to invent any of the methods. We just used traditional standard methods. But the point is we've got a huge amount of data to analyze. And on top of that, when the mice died, or in some cases when we killed them on purpose, we isolated a whole bunch of tissues so that we can do the kind of analysis that you can't do non-invasively. And that analysis, again, has not happened at all yet. We've got a whole bunch of tissues frozen and fixed, waiting to be analyzed, not just by us, but by collaborators. And, again, for budgetary reasons, that part of the study has not yet begun. But still, with all that said, our priority is to get RMR2 going.
Yep. Before we get into RMR2, because I want to go into that in detail, are there any results that you can share from RMR1?
Well, so the main result, of course, is the lifespan. So what happened was that we had 10 treatment groups, one treatment group that was getting all 4 of our chosen interventions, one that was getting none of them, and then we had 4 groups that were getting just one of them, and 4 groups that were getting 3 of them. The idea there is that that's how we can identify when there are antagonistic interactions that we might not have expected, where interventions are in some way cancelling each other out. And so, at least in the female mice, everything was very much as we had hoped in terms of the proof of concept. The mice that got all the treatments did the best, the mice that got none of the treatments did the worst, and everything else was somewhere in the middle. So that meant that we were demonstrating clearly that we were getting this additivity we're looking for, added benefit from combining. In the males, it was a bit more complicated. Some of the groups behaved strangely, but more or less the same story. So yeah, that's really important. However, the other thing which came out of the study, which was, if you like, disappointing, was that the magnitude of the effect we got did not beat this 4-month glass ceiling that has existed for so many years. We just got more or less the same again. And so, our conclusion from this is that we're just not ticking enough boxes, that our portfolio of interventions that we used just, was not comprehensive enough to slow down all of the life-limiting types of damage accumulation that the mice experience. And that's why we want RMR2 to be a bigger experiment with 8 interventions. I will go further. Actually, it's rather, I wouldn't say that we regret doing only 4 the first time round. First of all, because we were just finding our feet. This is the first time that anyone's done any study remotely like this.
Yeah.
But secondly, because honestly, there were not enough interventions around to choose from. Whereas there are now. During the 3 years that study was ongoing, there's been a torrent of new publications coming out from all over the world showing that this or that approach, started in middle age, the way we're doing, can significantly extend lifespan. And so most of the interventions that we want to combine this time around are from those studies, things that we would not have thought of 3 years ago because, nobody had tried it even individually. And so now combining them is a really big deal. So another thing that I should not in any way sweep under the carpet here is that the intervention that seems to have done most of the heavy lifting in the study was the one that we're least interested in, namely rapamycin. Rapamycin is not a rejuvenation treatment, a damage repair treatment. It's a calorie restriction mimetic, first and foremost. And therefore, we expected rapamycin to give that kind of amount because it's done so in other people's hands on its own. And so what we did not get is other treatments significantly improving things relative, over and above rapamycin. We got maybe a little bit of extra benefit, but only a little.
But you're still keenly interested in pursuing prevention, with senolytics and stem cell therapies and those things, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, remember that this damage repair approach is kind of, you could describe it as prevention or as treatment. I like to call it a sweet spot between the two, because it's prevention in the sense that it's designed to be applied to individuals that are not yet sick, whether mice or humans. But it's treatment in the sense that it turns the clock back. It restores people or mice to a younger biological age. So yes, but rapamycin is just prevention. It slows aging down. It does not reverse it.
Got it. And so did your data at all say anything about health span as well as lifespan, or is that the part you're still working on?
It's the part that we still have to analyze the data on. However, our general feeling is absolutely health span did increase to the same extent that lifespan did. And of course, this is what you always expect to see. It's very hard to extend sick span. And it's also, you don't get much compression of morbidity either. So it's not like you can extend health span without expanding lifespan.
Got it. Great. So then, thank you for letting me put you off, but I want to turn you back on now around RMR2.
Right.
When is it happening? Do you know? What is it likely to be? All of those sorts of things.
Yeah, it will happen about 10 minutes after I receive $6 million. It's that's the cost of the study. And I'm afraid, the painful thing about these studies is that most of the expense is at the beginning. First of all, you've got to buy the mice. And, a very young mouse costs, a few tens of dollars. But an old mouse, like an 18-month-old mouse, costs like $300 because, someone's had to keep it alive all the time. And so, even that is a respectable amount of money for 2,000 mice. Then the treatments, most of them, are rejuvenation treatments, damage repair, which means that we do them once at the beginning of the study. In some cases, we may do them again a year later, but by then a bunch of them might have died anyway, so it's cheaper. So the expense of the labor involved, the reagents and everything, it's front-loaded. So really, I can't pull the trigger until I've got at least 3/4 of that $6 million.
That makes perfect sense. And like everybody else, I suspect you're experiencing that funding is very difficult. I mean, here in the U.S., we've had draconian cuts to the National Science Foundation and others that truly matter in terms of supporting longevity research.
It's absolutely terrifying. I mean, the cuts that have happened already are bad enough, but it's getting worse. The government announced their proposed budget for the National Institutes of Health just in the last couple of days, and it's 30 or 40% down across the board, including for the NIA, the National Institute on Aging. And this is while the government are at the same time, trumpeting their interest in doing something about aging. Just a couple of days ago, there was this big panel in DC hosted by RFK Jr., the guy who runs the AHS. And, with his deputy, Jim O'Neill, and with Brian Johnson, and with the chief executives of a couple of the most important companies in this space, so for all the talk, at the end of the day, if you say one thing and then you do another in terms of slashing budgets, then what am I supposed to believe? So I mean, of course, the philosophy in the government right now appears to be that there is a lot of waste, but even if there is some scope for improved efficiency, you don't achieve that by just firing a lot of people. It's
completely agree.
Completely insane.
Agree. No, we're in a really difficult time here. At a time when overall medical funding is going down a lot, and it has always been the case that longevity has been deeply underfunded within what budgets were there.
I mean, the NIA is, people frivolously call it the National Institute for Alzheimer's Disease because that's functionally what it has become, And even within the Division of Aging Biology, the division of the NIA that is supposed to focus on fundamentals of aging, small fraction of what is spent there, and this has always been true, small fraction is actually translational, actually looking for ways to do something about aging rather than just to understand it better. It's been a very deep-seated, entrenched dogma within the field, and this is true globally, not just in the US, that, aging is just so complicated that we need to understand it better before we have a prayer of doing anything about it. And, over the past decade or so, that has gradually changed. I've obviously played a big part in trying to, embarrass people into being a little bit more honest about where we actually are and how much we actually need to know in order to be able to make a difference. And that's bearing fruit, but it's so slow.
It truly is. It truly is. And, given that 3/4 of us these days are dying from cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and other non-communicable diseases that are a function of behaviors and potentially subject to intermediation and remediation of various sorts, there's so much that could be done. And the sort of combinatorial explorations that you're doing, I think, are so critical to all of this.
Well, I mean, I believe that they're the only way that we're going to make progress. These so-called diseases of aging are not diseases. They're aspects of aging that we have chosen to give disease-like names to. And if we don't pursue the fundamentals of doing something about the accumulating damage that ultimately delivers and drives these so-called diseases, then we're never going to get anywhere.
Completely agree. That is another reason why I was so happy to see Dylan Livingston from the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives at our Biomarkers of Aging conference. I think it's so important to get our government involved in understanding that curing longevity is in many ways a lot easier than curing each disease individually.
Well, it's easier than it's very hard, but
it is hard.
Curing each disease individually is not just hard, it's impossible. It's clearly impossible because, the reason why I always begin my lectures, especially to general audiences, by explaining this misclassification, this misguided terminology, is because people are trying to do this. They're trying to cure these diseases in the same way that we can cure an infection, as if, you could just make it go away. But in fact, because these so-called diseases are consequences of accumulating damage, and because the damage is continuing to accumulate and always will because it's a product of metabolism, a product of being alive, any attempt to directly attack the pathologies is always, inevitably, going to become progressively less effective as people get progressively older. And, a child could understand that. It's completely obvious.
Let's hope that we can get our government to understand it and that we can do a better job of getting more government funding. But also, to your point of raising funding, of course, it's a global environment right now, and there's a lot of things happening on the global stage for financing. Perhaps we should have a separate conversation after this, because I'm hopeful that I could link you to some people that might be able to help, because we want to get RMR off and running as soon as we can.
So right.
Excellent. So is there anything else that you've wanted to say today that I haven't found a way to ask?
Of course, the main things that I wanted to say, I have now said. I've explained what RMR is and why it's important and why it's not happening as fast as I would like. But yeah, in the global perspective, I think we can talk a little bit about the private sector because 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, but really even as little as 10 years ago, there was no private sector in the longevity movement. There were no companies. A couple of companies had just started and they weren't really getting anywhere. And now it's huge. It's exploding, which is fantastic. Most of the companies, of course, since they haven't existed for very long, they're quite small. They're still being funded at seed level, Series A at most. Some of them, however, have got further. A few of them have gone public. Some of them are unicorns now, which is fantastic because it means that work is happening faster. Investors just inherently, they write bigger checks than donors do on average, and that means that work happens faster. But of course, there are downsides. The main downside is that anyone who wants to make money, they want to make it tomorrow. And so everyone in the private sector is inherently biased towards low-hanging fruit, towards things that can generate revenue in the near term. And that is, in general, and certainly in this field, it is at the expense of the wider goal, the greater goal of bringing aging under comprehensive control. So, for example, the RMR studies cannot be done in the private sector because they are not going to generate significant new intellectual property, on their own. They have to be done in the nonprofit sector. And that's okay because investors who are investing in actual companies that do have intellectual property, they want a return on that investment. And if RMR succeeds and changes the whole conversation around aging and generally explodes the industry much faster than what's happening now, then every investment that people make will give a greater return in a shorter amount of time than it would if you didn't have this. So one can think of donating to LEV Foundation to do RMR as a kind of indirect investment. There is logic to it even from a purely profit motive perspective.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Of course, that's my company's raison d'etre. That's why we're here. We believe that companies, especially insurance companies, have an enormous amount at stake in both predicting and also enhancing longevity over time.
Another thing about the private sector that's worth mentioning, because this is a big misconception that a lot of people have, is that the medical industry is somehow against this work. The medical industry today, of course, doesn't have very much prevention in it. It's mostly focused on keeping sick people alive. And everyone simplistically says, well, this is how the industry likes it because it works financially. And they really don't want to cure people because that's not a business model. You can't sell them anything anymore. But prevention, of course, is an ongoing thing. If you want to keep staying healthy, then you have to carry on taking your preventative medicine. And similarly, at the level of the FDA, the FDA get such a bad rap, but they're just implementing the law, and the law is what it is because that's what the public have elected people to do. So ultimately, the fundamental problem is that the public need to be educated to understand the value of prevention, not just prevention in terms of lifestyle, but prevention in terms of preventative medicine. At the moment, people who are just bad at working with probabilities will think that will have their thinking dominated by the minute chance that some medicine will make them sick when they're not yet sick, at the expense of thinking about the big chance that this medicine will stop them from getting sick for a lot longer than they otherwise would. If we can get people over that hurdle so that they understand that preventative medicine is actually a good idea, then the entire industry will follow the money. It's not as if the industry are really the culprits here.
We completely agree. We think industry, not just culprits, they can and should be primary partners in advancing this. And we're working with many of them right now to do just that. I mean, we believe, epigenetic testing, for example, is something that can really help people understand their biological age and optimize that age over time through various interventions. Totally. And so it's an exciting time to be alive. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate speaking with and just knowing you, Aubrey. We're definitely working toward the same objective here of helping people understand what's coming, and at the same time accelerating the date that those advancements will really come about.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you so much, Aubrey.